Okay, so you hear all the time about deporting these like dangerous criminals, right?
Yeah.
And it kind of makes sense when you first hear it, but what happens when you start looking into it more and those claims don't really add up? That's what we're going to be looking at today.
Yeah, we've got a fascinating situation surrounding this deportation of a whole bunch of people, like 238 people, to a prison in El Salvador called Sickcot. And the Trump administration's kind of painting a picture of these people that we're going to dive into and see how accurate it is.
Right. We're going to be going through the claims made by the Trump administration, and we're going to be going through the claims made by the Trump administration, as discussed on the Ring of Fire YouTube channel, which in turn was talking about a 60 Minutes report that was done.
Yeah.
And so what we're going to be doing today is looking at, are these claims accurate? What are the facts here?
Yeah, so the first thing to know is that the place where these people were sent, the Secot prison in El Salvador, is described as a torture prison, a slave prison, one of the most horrific super prisons on the planet. It's described in the report as all of those things, and so that's where 238 people from the U.S. were sent.
And the Trump administration said that aside from one mistake, everyone deported was like a horrible criminal. The worst of the worst. Gang members and murderers is the way that they put it.
So how do you go about finding out if that's actually true?
Right.
So in the 60 Minutes report, they took the names of all the people deported, reportedly provided by the administration, and they looked up their criminal records.
Okay, so what did they find?
Well, they found that 75% of the people who were deported had absolutely no criminal record whatsoever in the United States.
So 3 out of 4 of these people had never been arrested or convicted of any crime in the U.S.
Correct.
Wow.
They also found that 3% had what they call undetermined criminal status, meaning that they couldn't really determine whether they had a criminal record.
And then of the people who did have some kind of criminal record, 12 of them, which is about 5%, had records of prosecutions or arrests for violent crimes. So that's like murders and assaults and stuff like that.
Right. And the other 22% had records for nonviolent crimes. So like vandalism and shoplifting.
Okay, so that's 75% no criminal record, around 22% nonviolent crimes, and only 5% with records of violent crimes. The initial claim, though, was that 100% were the worst criminals.
That's right.
What did the Trump administration say when confronted with the fact that 75% of these people deported to this horrible prison didn't actually have a criminal record?
Yeah, so a spokesperson for Homeland Security was reported as saying that these individuals are actually terrorists, human rights abusers, gangsters, more, who just don't have a rap sheet in the U.S.
Okay, so even though they don't have a criminal record, they're still criminals because they're terrorists, human rights abusers, and gangsters. Interesting. What kind of evidence do we have for that? Do we know?
It's not really clear.
Okay, well, the administration also said something else too,
Right.
right? They also said that every single one of these individuals committed a crime when they came into this country illegally, and therefore it's not true to say that they are not criminals.
Yeah, and this is where it gets tricky because you have to understand a pretty important legal distinction that we make in the U.S.
Okay.
So in the U.S., entering the country illegally or overstaying your visa, that is not considered a crime.
Really?
Yeah, it's not prosecuted in criminal courts. It's handled in civil courts.
Yeah.
And so the consequences are things like fines or deportation. They don't send you to prison for it.
So it's kind of like getting a parking ticket.
Yeah, it's more like a civil infraction, so it's not like the kind of crime that the administration was initially talking about.
Right, so it's definitely not the worst of the worst.
Yeah.
And then on top of all of that, there was a statement attributed to Caroline Leavitt saying that, well, everybody in the country illegally is technically a criminal, so therefore they all fit our description.
So it's kind of interesting that first they called these people the worst criminals, and then when it turned out they didn't have criminal records, they changed the definition of criminal to include anyone who is in the country illegally.
Right.
So the goalpost kind of moved there.
And what's really interesting is that we know from some reporting that a majority of people already disapproved of sending anyone to the Secot prison, even before all this stuff about their criminal records came out.
Yeah, and you know, this entire situation, it kind of makes you wonder, because immigration is obviously a really complicated issue.
Oh, yeah.
And people feel very strongly about it. And so when you have the government making these kinds of claims, you have to wonder what impact that's going to have on how people view these issues. And you have to wonder if people are going to be able to trust the information that they're getting about these issues.
Yeah, especially because we're talking about sending people to a prison that is repeatedly described as horrific, a place with like serious human rights abuses. And then it turns out most of these people never even committed a crime in the first place.
Right. It's a complicated situation, and it's hard to know what the best approach is.
Exactly. But it's important to be aware of all the facts.
Absolutely.
So at the end of the day, what we've seen here is a big difference between what the Trump administration said about these people being deported to El Salvador and what the 60 Minutes report found.
Yeah, so they said that these people were dangerous criminals, the worst of the worst. But then the investigation showed that 75% of them had never even committed a crime in the U.S., and only a tiny percentage had been convicted of anything violent.
So the question I would leave you with is this. What does all of this tell us about the way we talk about immigration? And what does it mean for us that the government was making claims about these people that turned out to not be true? And what does that mean for our ability to have informed discussions about these important and really complicated issues? Think about it.